world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, November 24th, as you are listening to this. And of course, we're starting off a new week. There's always stuff to talk about. Now, one of the stories I covered yesterday in my TikToks involves Donald Trump on Saturday night going on a couple of unhinged rants on Truth Social, all caps. So he posted literally the whole thing is all caps, no punctuation. It was a stream of consciousness tweet about these veteran Democratic lawmakers who posted a couple of videos, or a video, I think it was. I don't even think it was more than one. I think it was just the one that was telling members of the military that they had to ignore illegal orders, that it was their job to ignore illegal orders. Now, the Republicans have been trying to spin that message ever since that video came out, trying to say that, well, what they're really saying is that they're telling them to ignore everything Donald Trump says, and that they're telling service members to ignore legal orders from the commander in chief. None of that's true. In fact, one of the things that military personnel get taught, whether you're enlisted, whether you're an officer or whatever, is that you do not have to follow unlawful orders. And we are hearing that members of the military are seeking legal counsel about what qualifies as an unlawful order and the process for refusing those orders, because they don't want to be hit with violations down the road and potential charges through the UCMJ, the Universal Code of Military Justice. And when Donald Trump is gone for going along with the things he is doing, those are very real possibilities, and that certain service members are concerned. So Donald Trump goes on a Truth Social rant, calling it treason and sedition, and he's been doing this over the last couple of days, trying to point out that these lawmakers, if they're found guilty, the penalty would be death and all of this stuff. He took it far. He's way too far. But that's Donald Trump. He goes, to the extreme at every chance he get. At every chance he gets, he's going to go to the extreme. And he's thinking this is going to make him look like a tough guy. What he doesn't realize, because he's stupid, is how it makes him look weak, that he can't handle some criticism. And what is really being said, what these lawmakers said was just a reminder to the military that they do not have to follow unlawful orders, illegal orders, which is true. And with the Republicans and with Donald Trump saying, well, they're saying that they don't have to follow anything I say. So are you admitting that every order you are giving is an illegal, unlawful order? Sounds like it to me. But see, Donald Trump misses the nuance of that. He doesn't think that far ahead. He's just trying to get his point across. He's mad at these Democrats for showing any sort of opposition to him and making him look bad or whatever. So he wants to come out like the tough guy. Now, it's not working. And he comes out looking stupid in the end, because that's who Donald Trump is. Ultimately, the Republicans may have to make a decision as to what they want to do with Donald Trump in regards to this. Now, so far, they have not come out and said anything negative about him. They haven't said, you can't say that, Donnie. It was a bad move. So far, they're trying to defend him. But their defenses of him are getting weaker and weaker as the time goes on. Donald Trump is losing support. There are cracks forming in Congress. And I think you are going to see Congress turn away from Donald Trump. The Republican Party is probably going to turn on him, potentially before the midterm elections, maybe even by the end of the year, depending on what happens with the fallout from the Epstein files. But I think maybe definitely if they don't do anything before, they would probably do something after the midterms when they get smoked. And if they lose the House by 40, 50 seats, and if they lose the Senate, which is a possibility, maybe it's a slim possibility right now, and maybe the polls aren't looking that good, but it's a possibility. And if they lose both chambers, I could see the Republicans turning on Donald Trump just to try to save their party and go forward into 2028. Talked about it the other day. Apparently, there is talk about the Bush family endorsing another Bush to run in 28 in what could be a very messy primary to replace the potentially even JD Vance if he is the president at the time, but to come up with a nominee for 28. Normally, you would run the incumbent president or vice president, but sounds like there could be a very messy primary challenge for the Republican nomination. Ted Cruz hasn't ruled out running. Donald Trump himself has hinted about Marco Rubio. Don Jr. and Eric both have floated the idea of maybe running, which I don't think either one of them are going to want to run because by the time this comes around, the Trump name is going to be not well liked in the world of politics. It's going to be one of those situations where they may have to go into hiding of sorts because they don't want to be connected to their own father. But we hear all sorts of names that are being floated about who might run. This isn't a good look for Donald Trump. The cracks are there. Now, if they break from him with the Epstein files, and I think that's how they do it. I think they use the Epstein files to break from Donald Trump, especially if he is in there as deep as we think he is, which it seems like from what we have seen already that he probably is, that they use that as a way to justify breaking with him that would keep the MAGA base voting for Republicans. That is the main reason they haven't broken with him yet, is he brings a base of voters that they couldn't reach before, who will not vote for Republicans if they turn on Donald Trump. He puts basically a loyalty test out there, and what they're hoping for is to find a way to reach those voters while still turning on Donald Trump. And it's a fine line, but because of the Epstein files, a lot of them care about what happens to children, and all of the victims from Epstein sounds like they were all children. So, and there could be thousands of victims. The MAGA base, and like 90% of the country wants to see what's in those files and who's connected. But if Donald Trump is as deeply connected in there, at least a significant portion, I believe, of the MAGA base could turn on him and accept the Republican Party for turning on him. So Donald Trump could be out on his ass, maybe even yet this year, because next month is when Pam Bondi would have to release the Epstein files. And that clock is ticking. And you already have members of Congress on the Republican side saying, we know what should be in those files, and if you mess around too bad, we will release the client list on the House floor. Why on the House floor? Because they can't be sued for anything they say on the House floor. If you're a member of Congress and you are speaking on the House floor, you can say pretty much whatever you want, and you can't be sued. Now, if I came out and said I knew who the list was and I started giving a list of names with no evidence, just sitting here on the podcast, I could be potentially sued for defamation. But if Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massie, and there might even be a couple more that may be willing to jump on board this bandwagon, if they read it on the House floor, they don't have to necessarily have all of the proof and prove their case, etc. They can say it, and there is no repercussions. So, people around Donald Trump, I think, are worried about what is going to happen with that, and that they are worried about, releasing these files. Donald Trump played a game with the Epstein files. He ran on releasing him because he thought he could get into office and do what they tried to do, which was say there's nothing to see here, it's not really relevant, there's nothing in the files, all of those kind of things. And that when they did that, that the voters would go, yeah, okay, we believe you, and they would quit talking about the Epstein files. But it backfired. Every time they brought up the Epstein files, it made things worse for Donald Trump and the Republicans. They would bring it up. Pam Bondi talked about how they were sitting on her desk. She just had to review it. And then they were, the calls to release the files got louder. And then she comes out and says, well, there's nothing to see in the files. There really isn't a client list. There's nothing going on. Calls got louder. Every time they bring it up, it just increased the desire for these files to be released. So I think what could happen is if they botch the release of the files, and if it looks like they're covering something up, or even if they do release the files and Donald Trump is deeply embedded, and if there is actual proof in there somewhere about Vladimir Putin or somebody like that having incriminating evidence about Donald Trump, where it looks like he could be compromised, that the Republicans would move on Donald Trump, impeach him, and remove him. Now, we are hearing from Al Green in Texas. Representative Al Green has said he thinks that Donald Trump will be impeached by the end of the year, that he plans to bring articles of impeachment, potentially over the Epstein files, but maybe for some other things as well. Now, this may take Republicans signing off on it. And it may even take a discharge petition. We know Speaker of the House Mike Johnson does not like discharge petitions. Why? Because they go around leadership. And they haven't really been used that often, and not successfully. They've been used several times with Speaker Johnson, at least twice that I'm aware of, maybe even one more. And he's unhappy with that because it makes him look weak. So we're hearing Mike Johnson he wants to change the rules to get rid of discharge petitions or make it a higher threshold. But even the Republican Party is saying, no, Mike, we're not on board with that. So though they couldn't do anything until the start of next Congress, and next Congress begins January 3rd, 2027. And that's if the Republicans are in the majority. And I don't think they're going to be. I think Democrats take the House by 40, 50 seats. Now, I thought they were going to retake the House in 2024, but I was proven wrong. I didn't think it was going to be 30 or 40 seats, but I thought maybe by 10. And maybe I'm misremembering what I said. I may have to go back and double check my videos. If I did say 30 or 40 seats back then, I was wrong. And either way, even if I said 10, 30, 40, whatever the number I said was, clearly I was wrong. This country decided to leave it in the hands of Republicans. And now we are facing the outcome of that. And they don't have any plans to make anything better. But they may move on from Donald Trump. I think I talk about this almost every day, but we're waiting to see if they make that move. Now, if they do, it is going to be huge, right? If articles of impeachment pass the House of Representatives between now and January 3rd, 2027, it would take Republican votes. Probably. Now, why do I say it that way? Well, first of all, it would take Republican votes because they're in the majority. And I don't think Republicans are going to sign off on it unless they know they have the votes in the Senate to remove Donald Trump. The old adage goes, you don't shoot at the king, or if you shoot at the king, don't miss, right? And that's what they do here. Donald Trump, if he gets impeached again right now with Republicans in control of the House, that is just a way for them to control the narrative, right? If they won't fully bring the charges, or they won't, even if members of Congress on the Republican side in the House of Representatives even if they believe in impeaching and removing Donald Trump, I don't see them bringing it or voting on it or voting to pass it unless they have the votes in the Senate. When they make that move, I think it would be a foregone conclusion that he gets convicted in the Senate. Now, they may try to offer him some kind of Nixon level deal of, hey, you go ahead and, instead of us impeaching you and embarrassing you and showing the world how weak you are, you just resign and we'll leave you alone. Now, they could maybe do that, but I don't know if Donald Trump's ego would allow him to handle it. But one of the things I said there, though, was it probably would require Republicans between now and January 3rd, 2027. And I said probably because you got to realize how narrow of a margin they are working with right now. I believe there are currently 3 open seats. There are 213 Democrats, 219 Republicans, and if I did the math right, that is 432 with 3 open seats. Now, we know one of the open seats is Mickey Sherrill, the Democrat who won the governor of New Jersey, safe district, probably going to be a Democrat there. One of the other seats that will be up for election, I believe in January, is going to be a runoff. It's in Texas, but it is a Democratic-controlled district, and both of the people in the runoff are Democrats, guaranteed pickup. So those 2 seats bring us up to 215 for the Democratic Party. 215 and 219 with 1 vacancy. That brings us to an election that is going to happen in just a little over a week on December 2nd in Tennessee. If the Democrats somehow pick up that seat. And looking at what happened earlier this month where Democrats were way outperforming, it's possible. Now, I don't know what the polling is saying, and I'm not sure where that race actually sits. I'm going to wait till election day to actually look at it and see overperforming, underperforming. I'm just saying it's coming. This election is going to happen. If the Democrats pick up that seat, well, that would be 3 pickups. 213 plus 3 is 216. And then we have something we didn't expect to see coming. Marjorie Taylor Greene has announced that she is not going to be resigning from Congress. Not retiring, but resigning. Now, she could have just said, I'm retiring at the end of the term. I'm not seeking re-election. But she didn't do that. She's resigning. Now, a lot of people think that that means she's got something bigger planned, whether she's going to try to run for Senate in Georgia, whether she's going to run for governor, and I don't think she's got a chance for a statewide race. She's blaming Donald Trump and Republicans for the fear and the political violence and everything that's going on. And she doesn't like the fact that she's been attacked. She's been called a traitor and done all these things by Donald Trump. And she is talking about lowering the temperature and how there's no place for those kind of attacks, etc., in politics. Yet she built her brand on those exact kind of attacks. That is what she was known for. She was perfectly fine with it when it was Republicans going after Democrats. But now that they've turned on her, of course, she is not happy about this. So she's resigning. Now, her seat is pretty red. It is probably a very safe seat for Republicans. But for the fun of it, let's just say miracle happens, Democrat wins that seat. That's another pickup. You add it to the other 3 with the 213 they already have, that's 217 to 218. Mike Johnson would be sitting with the exact majority he needs to keep the Republicans in power. Now, if one more Republican, if we pick up all 4 of those seats, and 2 of them are a very likely possibility, I'm not sure about that Tennessee race, but if we pick up all 4 and one more Republican dies, resigns, what gets picked by Donald Trump and accepts a cabinet position. Who knows? And a Democrat would win the seat. Mike Johnson, I believe, because the majority party shifted, I believe Mike Johnson would be out as Speaker of the House, or that being the majority party, the Democrats could hold a vote to vacate, and they would vacate the chair. And then once they're the majority, they vote in a Speaker of the House, presuming it would be Hakeem Jeffries for right now. I know we've got issues with Hakeem Jeffries. He's got some baggage. He is not as good as of a minority leader as I thought he was going to be. He has kind of been doing the things Nancy Pelosi would have done. Seems like he's kind of a puppet for her. And I thought he was going to be better. Now, he at times has flashes of brilliance where it seems like he would be a great speaker. And maybe if he gets this opportunity between now and the end of this current Congress, maybe we have to see what he does with it and whether or not it's worth re-electing him as speaker going forward. So, I mean, and I know that's kind of far-fetched to think about, that the Democrats could pick up 4 of those seats and maybe one more. But it's possible. When the Democrats are winning seats in places where they've never won before, there were 2, I think it was utility commission boards in Georgia. Those positions had never been held by Democrats, according to Will, our friend from the Rational Boomer podcast. He's been talking about it, how those positions were Republican all the time, and they were so uncompetitive that a lot of times Democrats didn't even run, and they flipped 2 seats. You have Mississippi, where they had a supermajority in the state house for 13 years, and they lost 3 seats, and it broke the supermajority. The tide is turning against the Republican Party, so who knows what could happen. So as we're dealing with all of it, we just got to keep watching and waiting and see, and keep the pressure on the Republicans, because believe me, they're feeling it. Now, Donald Trump is talking about unveiling sometime today his healthcare plan. We've been waiting for some kind of a healthcare plan from Donald Trump for years at this point. And I read something right before I started this podcast that apparently the plan he is going to be introducing, or the thing he's going to be asking Congress to back, is effectively this bipartisan deal that I was talking about earlier. I talked about last week, that it would extend the ACA subsidies for 2 years. Now, the one thing that wasn't made clear in the articles I've seen on it, apparently they are talking about adding some eligibility requirements. Don't know what those entirely are. And it's probably, if it's like a lot of things, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. Because, some of the things they tried to add in when it came to eligibility requirements, like for food stamps and SNAP benefits, those kind of things, they said, well, you got to work so many hours or have like a qualified disability. But most people, who receive the benefits are already working. They're just not getting paid enough to be able to eat, right? It didn't affect that many people. And of course, there were always exceptions for stay-at-home parents if you had parents under a certain age. The only thing that they changed is they took that age down from 18 to 14, to where basically they said at 14 and up, if your youngest child is 14, you can, work outside the home, and you should bring in a little bit of income. You can't say, well, I've got children, because they're teenagers at that point. While they do need parental supervision, most teenagers do get at least some leeway. And there would be time in there where you wouldn't be needed to be at home. Like you could work during the day while they're at school, things like that. So we'll see what requirements they put on there, but apparently he is going to be pushing for this 2-year ACA subsidy extension. Now, this is different from what he had been pushing just a week ago. About a week ago, he was pushing for these Trump Care tax plans. And these Trump Care tax plan or savings account things were going to be, instead of giving the subsidies to the insurance companies, they were going to give the subsidies to the taxpayer. And then said, well, they can use it to pay for their own health care. But Donald Trump doesn't understand how insurance works. Okay. I would be surprised, except for being in politics, if Donald Trump has ever had anything that would even closely resemble an insurance plan. I mean, with him being the president, of course, he gets all of his healthcare needs met without paying for anything. That's a perk of being the president. But before he was president, I don't think he ever worried about insurance. If he wasn't feeling good for whatever reason, needed to go see a doctor, he just went. Oh, they gave him a bill for a couple of $100. Well, to somebody with the amount of money Donald Trump claims to have in wealth into the billions, him getting a bill for $100 for a copay at a clinic is like, somebody coming up to me and saying, hey, Eric, you have a bill here. It's a penny. I wouldn't think twice about paying a bill if it was just a penny, right? And that's how he deals with healthcare. For people of his stature, of his financial wealth, that at least what he claims to have had, it's not really a matter of affording it. They just do, right? They go get whatever they need, they pay what they need, and they're done. It's not a big deal. So Donald Trump doesn't understand how health insurance works, but it sounds like somebody has gotten to him and has convinced him, which doesn't take much anymore, about how this would be a win if he can get them to extend the ACA subsidies for 2 years. Now, the 2-year deal is about what I expected them to do. The 2-year plan would give them the ability to go ahead and not deal with it in the midterms, because it wouldn't expire after the midterms are over. So the pressure is going to be off to be answering questions about the ACA subsidies during the midterms, or at least Republicans think the pressure will be off. Now, if we keep the pressure on them and asking them how they're going to vote, et cetera, that's good, because, just because they don't expire at the end of 26 doesn't mean we can sit back on our hands. And we have to elect Democrats who are going to be putting more pressure to extend them again come 27, trying to make it, insurance more affordable, et cetera. Now, we will see if this passes. I think it will. There's bipartisan support in the House of Representatives, and if Donald Trump's on board, Mike Johnson's not going to block it from getting a vote. And it only takes about 4, maybe 5 Republicans to agree with all Democrats, and it gets passed. And because this is going to be affecting red states, there is a high number of voters in red states that are on the ACA. So because that's a thing, I think it's going to pass the House. And when it comes up to the Senate, same problem. Red states have a lot of voters that are on the ACA. Now, John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, has promised a vote on at least one bill that is sponsored by Democrats, or that Democrats want to hold a vote on for passing the ACA. And if this passes in the House, especially now that Donald Trump it sounds like Donald Trump is going to be on board for it. If this passes with a decent majority, I bet it passes the Senate too. Again, with Donald Trump's endorsement and with enough pressure coming from the House. Look what happened with the Epstein files. House passes it with all but one vote saying yes. And the Senate comes out and doesn't even vote on it. Says, we're going to pass it with unanimous consent. Does anybody object? Crickets. Nobody objected. It passed. I mean, they passed it in record time. It was one of the quickest bills they got. And Donald Trump had been expecting that to be delayed and to be dragged out, etc. So Donald Trump backing the ACA subsidy extension for now. Now, Donald Trump changes his mind on a whim, and he may still want to, down the road, look at these Trump savings plans, but they're not going to work the way he thinks they're going to work. Now, I would almost guarantee if Republicans are involved, and I don't know what the number is that they give out in subsidies per person, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's $2,000. Well, if that $2,000 is going to the insurance company, but you're going to give it to me instead and say, well, you have to spend it on healthcare. Well, first thing I would probably want to do is just spend it on my insurance. But I have an employer sponsored plan, so that's really not going to work. So I would use it on my deductible, things like that. But if that money doesn't carry over from year to year, and if it's just gone, it's not going to do me any good if I can't use it. And if they don't put restrictions on it, there's at least a segment of this country, and I know how they operate. I have been in their shoes. When you get money in, regardless of where it's from, or sometimes even if it's earmarked for something else, sometimes you go, I got to spend it on something else. I'll replace those funds down the road. It happens. And then down the road happens, and you don't have the funds anymore, and you need to figure out a way to, fill in a funding shortfall. It's not a good plan, but this is the best option, I guess, that they've come up with so far. It's ridiculous that it's even being discussed or being floated as any sort of a plan, but they've been desperate to get rid of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, since it passed. And the only reason we even have it in the current form that it is in is because of Republicans. Now, Republicans blocked what they attempted to do, and they attempted to do the public option. Basically, give everybody the option to buy into Medicaid or Medicare. And basically have it work something like that, where you pay for your plans. And as it's been explained to me, basic Medicare only covers, hospitalization, major medical, things like that. And then you got to get other plans to cover going to like doctor's visits, and you got to get a plan for prescription drugs. And you can even get a plan that you pay a premium and it fills in all of the gaps in everything else. And if they would have had an option like that, it would have been extremely popular. And we probably would be closer to having some kind of a universal health care plan, and private insurance would be out and gone. But Republicans blocked it because they didn't want that plan to pass. They were afraid it would be popular. And of course, they take insurance money donations, and it's big business. And of course, they're going to support big business. So Donald Trump was videoed over the weekend. He was with his grandson at the White House, and they were walking up by his Walk of Fame. And from the clips I've seen and the descriptions I've seen in a couple of news articles talking about it, apparently Donald Trump could not walk a straight line yet again. And beyond that, it once again appeared that he is dragging his foot, once again sparking, dementia fears and other health concerns with Donald Trump. He's not in good health. There is a chance he doesn't make it to the end of his term health-wise. We've been saying that all along. Now, there's other reasons why he may not make it to the end of his term as president. We were talking about it earlier about Republicans turning away from him. But his health may not hold for him to be president and they may have to seriously look at using the 25th Amendment, or, and I think this is an outside possibility, I don't think he resigns on his own. I think they would have to make him resign. But maybe he does because of his health. But apparently he was not able to walk a straight line. It was all over the place. And he was dragging his foot. Now, not being able to walk a straight line potentially is a sign of somebody who has had cognitive issues, potentially dementia, things like that. It's just another symptom. And then you add the dragging of one foot. I've talked about it before. I know people who have had strokes, and sometimes what happens, depending on what part of the brain is affected by the stroke, it can affect how you walk. Now, normally when you walk, you land heel first and you kind of roll your foot and you push off with the ball of your foot. And you do this instinctively. You really, like, once you figure it out, you start walking at, a young age, when you're a toddler, but you figure it out. You figure out that's how you walk. And it becomes habit and it's instinctual. The problem is, if you're not doing that, which it looks like Donald Trump is not doing that, if he's dragging a foot. So sometimes what happens is it affects like if this is your toe, if my fingers are actually your toes there, you can't lift that foot up enough to hit with the heel. And you just kind of drag that foot along like it's not doing anything. And that appears to be what he has been caught on tape doing. So it looks like he is having more health concerns. You add that in with everything else we know about his health. His diet isn't very good. Apparently, there are some reports out that one of the reasons he eats as much fast food as he does is he is concerned about, he thinks it's safer and it's better for him, and he can trust the quality of what he's eating, things like that. But he eats a very bad diet. He's not in the best of shape, and you add in what we've talked about, plus some of the other signs, and it is very clear that he is having some kind of cognitive decline. Whether it's dementia, whether it's just old age, whether it's Alzheimer's, I don't know. I'm not a medical expert, but I've seen enough to know that it looks like he is suffering from some kind of a problem. You add in the fact that he gets caught sleeping in public. He'll admit he won't admit to sleeping in public. He'll say, I don't sleep hardly at all. I barely sleep ever. Not being able to sleep at night when you've never had a problem with it before is a sign of dementia, potentially, or other cognitive issues. It's called sundowning. Sometimes when the sun goes down, you end up being more wide awake and alert, and you have trouble sleeping. And it sounds like Donald Trump is there. He's not sleeping. He doesn't look well. Okay. Donald Trump isn't doing great. And when all of it, the pressure of everything comes crashing down, it could be too much for him. And, he could ultimately have, some kind of a mental break. Maybe he has a massive stroke. Maybe his heart gives out. Who knows? He's facing so much pressure with the Epstein files and with a failing economy and just everything crashing around him. And his grip on the Republican Party is weakening. And it's weakening by leaps and bounds. It seems like every day people are becoming more and more brave to do the things they're doing. Like Donald Trump during his first term, you wouldn't have expected or you wouldn't have seen the Republican Party break 427-1 and vote to release the Epstein files. Wouldn't have happened just because he had that kind of control over his party. But he's effectively a lame duck, and they're realizing it. and he's probably not going to be able to bring them any sort of victory in the midterms. So they're looking out for, and I think they're watching to see what he's going to do and if they decide to move away from him. And that pressure has got to be getting to Donald Trump, as we're hearing about more discharge petitions coming in out in the House. And they negotiated this bipartisan deal that now Donald Trump is going to come out and be in favor of, even though it's not his plan. Donald Trump of the past would have said, I hate that plan, kill that plan, vote for my plan. He wouldn't have given in. He wouldn't have said, okay, I see your point, let's do it your way. Donald Trump is nowhere near in as good a shape as he thinks he is, and he is nowhere near the same power level he was even when he became president this time, let alone during his first term. It's just not at the same point. He's weakening at every turn, and it's becoming more and more apparent. Now, one of the things that came out, Marco Rubio, so our Secretary of State, basically came out and admitted that this 28-point peace plan that we talked about on one of the other podcasts I did, where they had this 28-point peace plan where Ukraine was going to give up control of some of their territory, but they'd still actually own it, but Russia was going to run it, and they'd have to scale back the size of their army. They'd have to give up their long range weapons and a whole bunch of things. And basically, it all came down to, it seemed like a Russian wish list. Well, now we're finding out that's exactly what it was. That they have effectively got a wish list from Russia, and it was in Russian. They translated it to English and presented it as a peace plan. That Russia wrote the peace plan, and the United States just agreed to it, regardless. Now, Reagan-era Republicans wouldn't have even entertained any sort of an idea like that because it was coming from Russia, or at the time, the Soviet Union prior to its collapse. But now we got Republicans in key positions, and I thought Marco Rubio was better than this, but I guess I expected a little too much out of him to go along with this idea. But they did. They turned around. They just signed off on it and said, "Yeah, Zelensky, you should agree to it." Now Zelensky's not going to agree to it. He has no desire to give up control of any land, and legally, he can't. Which is why they were offering some kind of a deal where Russia would administer the territory, but it would still technically be Ukraine's. And if you give in to Vladimir Putin even a little bit for Ukraine, he's going to push after a while to have the whole thing. And we owe Ukraine. We do. We should be doing far more than we've done. And this is a criticism that even could have been dealt with even better under Biden. Sure, we funded them quite a bit. But the problem is we promised Ukraine that back in the 90s with the Budapest Memorandum, if they returned their nuclear weapons to Russia, we would protect them. So did Russia. Russia also promised that they would protect them. Well, look what's happening now. Russia's the aggressor. But we promised we would defend them, and we haven't upheld that promise. Now, we should have done way more than the aid we've already done. Now, speaking of foreign aid, one of the things you will hear a lot coming out of Republicans and MAGA is, oh, well, we shouldn't give them give them all this money and send the money over there and everything else. Well, here's how we come to that number of what we give in aid. Not all of it, and in fact, a vast majority of it is not cash. Now, what we do is we go through our stockpile of surplus and go, okay, what can we get rid of that they can use? and we go, okay, well, we've got all of this here sitting here that we don't have, that we don't need right now. We can get rid of it, and we send it over there. But because it's on the books, it's got a dollar value. So that's where part of the money comes from. For other parts of it, we look at stuff that we were going to replace, soon, maybe not quite yet, but we go, okay, well, we were going to replace this stuff anyway. So how about we give them that? Again, there's a dollar value. And then we turn around and we buy new for ourselves and we upgrade our military. Okay. So in both cases, we're giving them used military equipment that is still useful and said, here, you can put this to good use. We'll just get new for ourselves, or we don't even need anymore, and not replace it. Option three is they turn to American manufacturers and say, okay, we need X, Y, and Z. We need all of these things made. And then they get built. And now you are putting money into the economy. You are putting people to work on factory floors, and you are actually producing stuff, sending it over to Ukraine. Now, if it's food aid, as long as it is something we can grow or produce here. Now, certain things we cannot grow here. And if we're giving that kind of stuff in aid, we have to go to the countries where they can actually grow it. But if it is able to be grown inside the United States of America, usually when it comes to foreign aid, we have to buy American and then send it over, which is all good things for American farmers. But we find out that this peace deal was set up by Russia. We just signed off on it, and it's not good for anybody. So I don't think this is going to actually end up coming through. Ukraine said they're not signing it. And of course, Donnie wants the peace deal done by the end of the week or whatever deadline he set. But he's doing it because he wants a win. Everything is going bad around him. He only cares that he gets the win because that way he'll be remembered as the peace president and the one who ended this war. Problem is, he said he could end it in a phone call within 24 hours of being elected. Well, here we are over 11 months into his term. Hasn't stopped it yet. I thought he was supposed to be the master negotiator and he was supposed to come up with all these brilliant deals. Hasn't happened. So we'll see if they come up with a new plan and maybe this time actually include Ukraine and a peace plan that would not be a Russian wish list. That way, if they come up with a decent plan, Ukraine will sign off on it. Now, what they should probably do is Ukraine gets all of their territory back. They should probably also get reparations from Russia, and Russia should be the one hit with sanctions against their military and being forced to reduce their size of their military, etc. I mean, we've done that before against the aggressors in varying wars. I mean, Japan still is not allowed to have a standing military after World War II. We're their standing military. So that's what we got to deal with there. They need to come up with some kind of a better plan. And when they do, Zelensky would agree to it. Now, would Putin? Probably not. But we need to find a way to put the pressure on Putin. And I don't know if we can do that with Donald Trump at the helm. Donald Trump thinks he's got the pressure and the influence to assert, but he really doesn't. It's not going well for Donald Trump, and it's only going to continue to get worse. Now, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, he came out with a brilliant plan, and there was some sarcasm involved, for how to lower your personal inflation. Because now we're hearing inflation numbers are up. That inflation is going back up, despite the fact that Joe Biden had fought like hell to get it back down and get it under control. Donald Trump ran saying inflation was too high, even though it wasn't true. He ran on this idea that he could get inflation under control and only he could fix it, which is one of the reasons why I didn't like Donald Trump going all the way back to 2016. I never believed in Donald Trump or his message, in part because when anybody comes up to me with anything, I don't care what the plan is or what we're talking about, if they're the only ones who can fix the problem, I typically don't believe them. I usually figure there's another way out, there's another way to fix it, but Donald Trump believes he's the smartest person in the room. Well, now that the inflation is going up, even though this administration does not want to admit it, Scott Bessent has a plan on how he says, well, you can lower your personal inflation and to make it cheaper to live. What's his grand plan? For you to move. Move out of blue states and move to Republican-controlled states. Well, I can tell you, living in a red state, it's not much better here. A lot of the red states, especially in the Midwest, there's a lot of farms, and they're hurt by Donald Trump and his trade policies. They're hurt by what he's doing with agriculture. He's wrecked their economy. Most places, it is, hard to find a job. You hear that the economy is shedding jobs. It's not nearly gaining the number of jobs that they think it should. Now, they have not officially released any jobs numbers going on a couple of months now. They have unofficial numbers coming out from people in the industry that are looking at things, and they're barely adding. They're only adding a few thousand jobs. And I think one of the months they even lost some. But the economy's not doing great. So good luck finding a job. Good luck finding a place to live when housing is unaffordable. And if you go move, you got to find some place to either live or to rent. Well, if you switch states and you decide, well, I'm moving to wherever, well, I'll get a job when I get there and I'll start getting paid and I'll be able to pay the rent. Problem is, what happens when there's no job? And what place is going to rent to you when you don't have any guaranteed income? When you can't prove that you're going to be making any sort of money? The whole plan is dumb, but do you expect anything else coming from this administration? All right, so the last story I want to cover is one that Aaron Parnas was talking about and is now being talked about by some of the mainstream news networks. And apparently there is a new feature on Twitter, and I refuse to call it X because that is dumb. And, Elon Musk rebranding something that had been around as long as Twitter just because he liked the name is ridiculous. But anyway, there's a new feature where if you click on a user's join date, it will tell you what country their account originated in. Now, apparently there are some bugs with it where if you've recently traveled outside of the country, it may show the wrong location, or potentially if you're using, I'm guessing, a VPN or something, and you are connecting to a foreign server, that it could also show the wrong information. But apparently tons of MAGA accounts on Twitter, some with massive followings, some that have been retweeted and reposted by the President of the United States, are foreign-based accounts. Some in Asia, some in Russia, some in Africa, all over the place. And this is a huge thing that is showing what we've known for a while. We suspected that a big chunk of the MAGA influencer sphere, the accounts that you see pop up, like when I do a live on TikTok or whatever, they pop up and all they say is the typical talking points. They're barely spelled correctly. That a big chunk of those is probably all fake accounts. And now we are finding out that there is truth to that. And that with this new feature from Twitter, you have a chance to figure out where these accounts were formed and make decisions based on that. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if they're any sort of MAGA leaning anywhere, I block them, because most of the time, especially with these bots, they will get into your stuff and then they will start mass reporting you. Also, and it's just not worth it. They try to take your platforms down. All they do is spout the same talking points over and over in your comments. They don't respond when you try to have an actual conversation, so it's just not worth it. I block them all. And it's one of the reasons why so far I think I've been able to stay under the radar and avoid any sort of, bans or community guideline violations or anything like that when it comes to all of it, when it comes to just being out here on social media in the first place. But the fact that we can now see where these accounts are coming from is bad news for Republicans and bad news for MAGA. We're going to have to see how, MAGA actually reacts to this information being put out there, because they're not going to like being duped. And we'll see if it changes who gets shared and how much influence the MAGA actually has. Maybe they will finally realize that they are not the silent majority as they think they are, but they're just a very loud, very vocal minority, and that we outnumber them by a long shot. The only reason it even looks like they have the numbers that they do is because of these bot accounts and these foreign accounts that are just trying to undermine everything that goes on here in American politics. All right, so that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. I want to thank you for joining me. Of course, I will be back tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about. And it's never dull, at least not with Donald Trump in office. We're going to see if he actually announces this plan today for the ACA credits. We're watching other things that are coming up today, and there's always stuff to talk about. So I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for joining me.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.